all set, Katie? All set? Yep. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started today. First of all, thank you everyone for being here for the District 17 Cracker Barrel. I'm Neil Fulton. I'll be your moderator today. Just a few things at the start. First, if you have not already, please silence or turn off your cell phone so we don't have interruption once the Cracker Barrel starts. So please silence or turn off your cell phone. Secondly, I want to say a few thank yous. First of all, thank you to Representative Bill Shormer, Representative Chris Casson, Senator Sidney Davis for being here and for representing District 17 and Pierre. Thank you to the VCDC for organizing this, and I have to say thank you to some sponsors, the USD Opportunity Center, Maloney Real Estate, Masaba, Premier Real Estate and Property Management, Sodexo, Biomat USA, Vermillion Hy-Vee, Dakota Realty and Property Management, and Polaris. This week's refreshment sponsor is the Clay County Democrats, so please thank them for the donuts. Just a few outlines of how today's forum will go. We have a series of topics we'll work through: budget, education, elections and voting, property rights and taxes, health and social services, open discussion at the end. I will tell the group right now that each legislator will have 2 minutes to respond to each question, and we have 15 minutes for each of these topics. We will not get to every issue. We will not get to every question. So I would encourage folks to submit written questions if you can. If you're interested in asking a question, raise your hand, and if we can get to that question, we'll have VCDC staff bring you up and make an opportunity to pose your question in 30 seconds. We're going to start with opening statements from the legislators, and each of them will have 2 minutes. And I guess if we can, we'll just start with you, Representative Sherman, and work straight across for a 2-minute opening statement, if you could.
Well, thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Neil. I appreciate the opportunity to come and sit in front of all you folks today and have a conversation about what's going on out in Pierre. Special thanks to the VCDC for hosting us, and of course the sponsors. My name is Bill Shorma. I serve in the House of Representatives for District 17. I'm married to my first wife of 49 years, and I have 10 grandchildren with 3 grown daughters and 10 grandchildren. And I have a manufacturing company over in Springfield, South Dakota. And that's how I have gained, been in manufacturing my whole career. That's how I've gained a lot of knowledge and experience about looking for unintended consequences of things that are being proposed in the legislature. And believe me, there's a lot of them this year. It's been a very interesting process. I've enjoyed it. I've felt challenged. I've challenged other people as well. And I really appreciate the opportunity, like I said, to be here today. And we'll see how it goes. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Senator Davis.
Thank you, Senator Sidney Davis. I live north of Vermillion on a farm with my husband and 3 children. I work in healthcare and serve as a vice chair of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. I sit on Senate Taxation Committee, where we'll be seeing a lot of the property tax proposals on the Senate side. We are working through them. And also, my last committee is Senate Ag and Natural Resources. And so I appreciate the leadership placing me on those areas where I feel like I can lend my expertise and share my knowledge and perspective there. It's an honor to serve the people of District 17. You've sent me back to Pierre quite a few times, and I don't take that honor lightly. I do my best to work hard, make educated decisions, and as always, take your input. So thank you for being here.
Representative Casson.
Thank you, Dean Fulton. Well, I just would echo the same sentiments from Representative Shorma about just a big thank you to everyone involved in this. I will tell you, speaking to other legislators, I think I say this every single time, we are the gold standard by which people judge Cracker Barrels and judge these forums. And a lot has to do with you as the great constituents. A lot has to do with the great hosts in the VCDC and what they do. And then we really have some fantastic moderators, including our very own, Dean Neil Fulton here. So we're the envy of the state when it comes to these kinds of things. So please keep it up, and please know that your engagement and the way that you show up to these things is very important to us. I am Representative Chris Casson. I live right here in Vermillion. I know most every person in this room. my wife works at the PA program at USD. I work at the University of South Dakota Foundation. We have 2 kids. Our daughter just turned 11 last Friday, and our son is 8. So I look forward to the questions today. And we've been 5 weeks in. We've been working pretty darn hard in Pierre. I think most of you know I did get appointed to the Appropriations Committee again, and this year has presented some different challenges than maybe we had in the first couple of years, where the first couple of years that we weren't talking about budget cuts, and this year we're contemplating cuts to the budget. So it's been a different experience in appropriations this year, but nonetheless, we are working hard, and we're trying to work on behalf of the people of Vermillion and the people of District 17 and the people of South Dakota. So look forward to the questions.
Thank you. I'm going to move around with who we start with a little bit. And Representative Cass, I'm going to start this one with you because our first topic is budget. Obviously, South Dakota has a constitutional requirement to pass a balanced budget in the end. And as you noted, we're facing some revenue shortfalls in a challenging budget environment. As you look at the remaining portion of the session, what are your priorities that you'd like to see effectuated in a final budget package, and why?
I think I hit something, but I don't know what it did. Anyway, well, thank you for the question, Dean Fulton. I think one of the things is going to be to try and understand where the majority of the body is, and the majority of our caucus is, on some of these spending and cutting priorities. I think that's going to be the biggest decider in what is and how we're going to get to a balanced budget. We did have revenue setting this Wednesday, and adopted those numbers on Thursday, which we adopted the numbers up a little bit, which seems kind of strange in a year where we've kind of seen trailing sales tax revenue across, kind of across the board in certain areas. But the LRC, who is the Legislative Research Council that works for us, they continue to maintain that we're going to see a bounce back this year, and they're the ones who work for us. They continue to be very confident in this. So we adopted our numbers up a little bit versus the governor's recommended budget. So that did allow for some extra dollars in the ongoing, and a few extra dollars in the one-time. So we do have some money above and beyond what the governor had recommended back in December to really speak to some of what I think the priorities are of, again, not just our caucus, but of the state. And overwhelmingly, when I hear from people in our community and communities throughout the state, that South Dakota Public Broadcasting is a priority, the state library is a priority. And so those two, I think, are the ones we hear about the most from the ongoing perspective. So,
Senator Davis, from your perspective, priorities in a final budget package, and why?
Thank you. Representative Casson took a lot of my talking points, so I'm going to do my best here to try to add to the conversation. I think the caucuses and the members are working hard to try to find consensus on what do we do about the proposed prison spending. That is using one-time dollars. And so there's some differing opinions. Some people don't want to spend any money on the prison. Some people recognize the need and that we need to. I apologize. There are others that think that we should use our AAA bond rating and bond for some portion of the prison to pay for it. So there's a lot of different opinions on that, and so still working to find consensus. And it's important to mention that because that, depending on if we do bond for a portion of the prison, that would free up some one-time spending dollars for proposals like one of my bills that I'm bringing forth asking for some money to one-time funding to go into the RAFE program, which is Rural Access Infrastructure Fund program, to keep that program going. It's currently out of funds, and Clay County and Union County have been huge benefactors of that, helping to restore and repair rural small bridges and culverts. It's incredibly important from a safety perspective and also from an economic perspective for our farmers and ranchers to get their products moved. So, sorry I had my own little selfish plug in there, but that's the prison. A lot hinges on what we decide to do with the prison, and it can impact what the final budget looks like a lot.
Representative Sharma, priorities for you in the final budget package.
Thank you. There's lots of priorities, and I'll explain a little bit, and Chris touched on this a little bit, Representative Casson, that we have one-time money and we have ongoing spending. Big difference. If we commit something to ongoing spending, that means that will have to be paid for every year. One-time money is exactly that. A lot of one-time money was spent with COVID dollars, federal dollars, to do an awful lot of, in 2023, we passed a ton of catch-up money on projects at the universities, at the state fair up in Huron. So a lot of those things were spent, a lot of those things were funded by one-time money. We have some one-time money this year, and there's a big debate. Now, that one-time money is not going to be used to fund the library or, what's the other one that's being, South Dakota Public Broadcasting. Those are ongoing dollars. And we'll have debates about that, and we'll talk about that. With respect to the prison, we had a discussion in caucus the other day. There are two different groups. One that believes a 1,500-bed prison should be built north of Sioux Falls at the present site that's being proposed. And another one says, yes, we need a 1,500-bed prison, but it should be built in Yankton. I've had businesses in Yankton. There's no way they're going to find people to work at a prison in Yankton of that size. And then also expand Springfield. I've got a business in Springfield. I can't find a single person of a professional level to come to work for me. And the state prison there has fight to keep enough people there for the ones that's there already. So anyway, those are some key things that we've been working on. And in the caucus, let me give you just 30 seconds here, I'll wrap up.
30 seconds.
Thank you. In the caucus, we have the whole list of demands for what requests are there or potential bills that are going to be passed requesting funding. We all take our priorities and pick. Remember, Chris and I, out of 70 legislators in the House, are 2. Our priorities aren't necessarily the priorities of the whole caucus. So we have to sort all that out and negotiate. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to pick up on an audience question here that asks about educational funding and the state's obligation to increase on an annual basis educational funding. Governor Noem had proposed in her initial budget a 1.25% increase for state employees, K-12 and medical providers, and Governor Roden, at least so far, has endorsed Governor Noem's proposed budget. Representative Shorman, I want to start with you and work back on this one. Is the 1.25 increase still viable, and do you support that number under the circumstances, or is there a different number, higher or lower, that you think we should be looking at?
I think the 1.25 is still in play. Personally, I'd like to see it to be a higher number, but we have to see where the ongoing money comes out and how that's all sorted out. So, yeah, I'd advocate for at least the 1.25.
Senator Davis, 1.25 for those big 3 as an ongoing increase, is that the right number, or should we be looking at something else?
Thanks for the question. I will be supporting absolutely 1.25. I think it's important to note that 1.25% increase also goes to education. That is also dictated to go to our Medicaid providers, like our SESDAC providers, people that take care of folks on Medicaid. And then that 1.25% increase also goes to state employees. And so we're talking about a huge swath of very important groups there that are reliant on these increases. And so it is tricky to find the number that works with the budget. I'm going to defer to our appropriations member here. I'm, again, very appreciative of his service on that committee, because he's in those conversations of what is viable, what's not viable. I think everybody agrees that 1.25 is not consistent with inflation and things like that, but at some point there's just only so much to go around, and we're struggling with budget revenues and things like that. So,
Representative Cass, in the light of state law on this, 1.25 the right number, or something else should we be looking at?
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton. Well, you know, as we kind of build out, and we call it a roadmap, that's how we get to the end. That's how we get into our budget, and that includes all of the different proposed cuts and all of the different proposed increased spending. We're talking about ongoing spending here over the next, that continues to go on and on and on. Included in that ongoing spending, as I think I discussed earlier, is South Dakota Public Broadcasting that is being proposed to be cut. The state library that's being proposed to be cut. There's other programs like graduate medical education. I mean, I think if any of you would know, in our state, we struggle to find healthcare workers, including doctors. And so when we start thinking we're going to cut residencies, that's going to hurt medical providers, not just in Sioux Falls, but really hurt medical providers in rural areas. Other programs like indigent medical services for assisted living patients. So it's essentially people who only have so much money on their Social Security check, the state bumps up so they can afford to stay in an assisted living program. There's 200 and something of those folks in the state, which they're proposed to basically have their funding cut, and I don't know what would end up happening to those individuals. So as we start to build out this entire big picture, the 1.25 is still sitting there. As I stated earlier, the budget numbers were increased on the ongoing side up just a little bit on Wednesday. So maybe 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, I would have probably been a little more half glass half empty on the idea of keeping it here. Today, I probably remain more glass half full, if that would make sense.
I want to ask one more question on budget before we move on to education. Senator Davis, I want to start this one with you because you talked about a special appropriation. We're talking a lot about ongoing funds and expenditures here in the general fund bill. Are there any special appropriations that are in front of the legislature this year that you think are particularly important and that you'd like to see move forward in the end of the day?
As Representative Shorma said, members have been discussing and looking at the list of proposals from that people are suggesting. There's a large ask for some to put forward money that would go to airports and airport infrastructure, and why you might wonder, and that is in effort to take advantage of some federal match dollars. I think it's like a 9-to-1 or something like that. It's a huge match opportunity that we could take advantage of to help increase our airport infrastructure, repairs, things like that, and help grow that. I think that's a good thing to do from an economic standpoint. We rely on sales tax, and right now what we do is a lot of kind of a constant churn of the same money goes around and round and round in the communities. And when we can incentivize outside dollars to come in and spend, that helps bring in new money into the pot, and then helps circulate that through our communities and through our sales tax revenues. So that's one of them. There are quite a few, but we're trying to balance some of this with also saving budget cuts. And so again, we're still talking about one time versus ongoing, but it's that's probably one that I think the state could take advantage of. But there are several, and I apologize, I don't have the list in front of me right now.
Representative Casson, any special appropriations bills you think are particularly important?
Well, shockingly, I do have the list in front of me, Dean Fulton. I will just go through a couple highlights that I think are obviously the largest boulder, and it's probably even bigger than a boulder in the room, is the prison. And so on one-time funding, we're talking about $148.1 million this year in one-time funding, going to basically finalize the $825 million guaranteed maximum price for the prison. I think Senator Davis touched on the airports. There's another one to pay off some bonds that the state has to turn, and I think this is a really good idea to turn one-time money into ongoing on some high percentage bonds, and this has been done in state government multiple times before. I think it's a good idea. A couple other ones I would just touch on, and then I'll give a plug for my own. Ellsworth Authority, to give some money to Ellsworth to help them as that new base comes in. Richmond Dam is up by Aberdeen. Lots of discussion about Richmond Dam and finally finalizing that project, which we've been funding kind of like this for the last, 2 or 3 years. some tech college equipment, some other things, some VOCA funding, which is important for this area, some grants for VOCA funding because the feds significantly reduced VOCA funding, and it's really put some pressure on us to try and put a Band-Aid to that. And then I will just make a plug. I have a bill to start a student teacher stipend program in South Dakota as a grant program because we have so much one-time funding, with the idea being that, once a student teacher starts with a school district, there's a good chance that we're going to be able to keep that person. And there's states around us that are getting very aggressive in this space, and they're coming up and really trying to attract our student teachers to come teach in Omaha or Council Bluffs or Des Moines or wherever it may be. And, once we lose those students to those areas, it's really darn hard to pull them back in. So last year there was basically, I think, 101 student teachers throughout the state, and I had a bill. So basically it's just a pilot program of $500,000 to offer $5,000 grants to different school districts to entice student teachers to stay in the state of South Dakota. So.
Thank you. Representative Shorma, and I know you and Senator Davis have joined Representative Caston in sponsoring that bill. Are there other special appropriation bills you think are particularly important?
Well, let me touch on the prison a little bit. When I first got to the legislature, I was in the camp that we really don't need to fund it all this year. Why would we need to fund the balance of the $145 million this year when they're not going to start construction for a couple of years? Well, here's the rub. If we don't fully fund it this year, then the bids can't go out, and to delay it for a year is $33 million. That's a huge pill to swallow every year that we delay the full funding, because once the thing is fully funded, then the bids go out, and they're guaranteed maximum bids. They won't be able to come back again and say, the $825 million, we bid that and it's firm and it's not going to have to be adjusted. So I've been keeping an open mind on that. Like I said, I've attended hours of information on the prison because I wasn't of the camp that we should fully fund that. With the stipend fund, you might find this interesting, that Chris has put that bill out. Last year, at this event, there was an individual that came up to us and said, what are you guys doing to help keep teachers in this state after they graduate? If you did something, that would be helpful. And Chris and I were standing there listening to him, and Chris goes, yeah, I think that makes sense. I go, yeah, that makes sense. So that's where that kind of came out of. So if you have ideas that can help, bring them forth. Sometimes we actually can take some action on some of that stuff. It isn't that the prison is my priority. The prison is the big elephant in the room that we have to decide whether we're going to fund it or not. I can tell you that in the House, there are 70 members in the House. It's approximately 35 to go forward and fund it this year and 35 to go forward and fund it in the future. But we haven't negotiated on how that's going to happen. So you need 2/3 vote, by the way. So it can't go 35-35. It has to be 2/3. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be yet to be seen.
I want to shift us now to education, if I can. And Representative Sherman, I'm going to stick with you to start this one. There was a lot of discussion about educational savings accounts, property tax credits, and other bills to provide public funding to private education. Senate Majority Leader Jim Melhoff had communicated to the governor that he sees those issues as dead for this legislative session. My question to you is, are they dead for this session, and what's your position on public funding for private education going forward?
Yeah, I believe they're 95% dead. There's always a chance that somebody's going to bring a bill, a hog house bill at the end of session to try to bring something like that back. I was not a fan. And let me tell you a story. I talked to my dad. He's 92 years old, but he's still sharp as a tack. And I said, Dad, you were in the North Dakota State Legislature. You sent your 8 children to Catholic school for the first 8 years of their education. There's a bill right now that says you might get $3,000 per child to send them to private school. What do you think about that? I said, I'll call you back tomorrow because I want you to think about this. I called him back the next day and he said, Bill, your mom and I have talked about this. We didn't have a lot of money back then, but we are so proud that we figured out a way to pay for that on our own. Don't take that away from us. So, best argument I heard. Anyway, and of course, public money for public schools makes sense to me, so, thanks.
Senator Davis, are the proposals on public funding for private ed dead for this year, and what's your position on that issue going forward?
Yeah, I think the Senate spoke pretty loudly on Thursday that there just isn't an appetite for that. And Senator Carley had brought forth even a different, much different proposal from the education savings accounts that tried to do a property tax refund, and it was very clunky and problematic, and in a variety of ways, creative idea, but just wasn't gonna thread the needle. And so, that died on a vote of 24-11, I think, in the Senate. And so, a lot of this, for me, comes down to two big points. Number one, we just don't have the money to do this. In states that have done this, it explodes, it becomes hundreds of millions of dollars. We're over here barely able to even fund public education, Medicaid providers, and state employees, and giving them an inflationary increase. I think those priorities need to be taken care of first. And for me, I'm very well aware of school choice. I'm proud of the school choice that we have in the state. We have a lot of opportunities for parents to exercise the ability to educate their children the way they want to. And I'm very well aware of all of that, as my son goes to St. Agnes here in Vermillion. We technically live in the Beersford School District. Our farm is in the Beersford School District. There's a good chance that we might exercise the open enrollment option and come to Vermillion or Elk Point. I don't know yet. We'll yet to make those decisions, but we have the opportunity to do those things. And so I appreciate our state's forethought many years ago to have those flexibilities in place for parents. We also have the Partners in Education tax credit program that gives scholarships to private school students that meet the low-income guidelines and requirements to participate in that program. And so there are already some of these scholarships available for families that are having a hard time maybe making that tuition difference. And so I'm frankly very satisfied with the school choice that we do have and the financial things that that are available.
Thanks, Senator Davis. Representative Casson, is public funding for private ed done for this year, and what's your position on the issue going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton. I would, I would defer to the senator to understand the position of the Senate on this issue. So if she says that it's by and large dead, then I would suspect it's by and large dead, because you have to have both chambers agree in order for something to move forward. I haven't heard any other rumblings, and we don't hear a lot in the House anymore about this particular issue, other than maybe moving forward. But I've made education, and obviously having an 11-year-old and 8-year-old, a pretty hallmark of my campaign and why I wanted to run and to continue to offer educational opportunities that I have. I'm a product of public education. I didn't go to private schools. I went to public education, and quite frankly, I went from public education from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. We moved around a lot, and I'm proud of that fact. In appropriations, we have work groups, and so we really spend time diving into particular topics. And this year, a couple of work groups I was on happened to be South Dakota Public Broadcasting, basically because it's housed right here in Vermillion, and the other one was on these educational savings accounts, vouchers, however you want to put them. And so we do some really deep dives and bring people in and ask all kinds of different questions to try and really understand and report back to the Appropriations Committee on things that affect the budget. And I'll just tell you one of the things that's interesting about the proposal this year. There was two proposals. One was a very expansive, kind of a really expensive approach, and then there was maybe more of a tailored approach of a $4 million, really in a tight budget year. The program would have provided $3 million to the different whether private schools or homeschoolers, but also had $1 million administration cost as well. So of the $4 million, 25% was going to be tied up in administration, and in a state that prides itself on being lean and operating efficiently. When you're talking about that kind of an administrative burden to operate a $3 million program, I mean, that's significantly high. It's just overwhelmingly high. As Senator Davis mentioned, the Partners in Education Fund. I would also mention that, we heard from a lot of homeschool parents during this process who were, interested, and overwhelmingly, and I'm trying to remember if I even had one homeschool parent who actually called me and actually wanted to support this. They like the way the current situation is, and they just kind of want it left alone. Sorry, Dean Fulton.
That's okay. I'm trying to strike the balance between getting through questions and giving you guys time to respond expansively. I want to stay with you, Representative Casson, on an intersection of budget and education that picks up on an audience question, and it's House Bill 1193, which was introduced and was amended a little bit to prevent the BOR from requiring on-campus housing or meal plans. And my question to you is kind of twofold. Do you support House Bill 1193, and what do you see as potential impacts both on existing bonding obligations for the Board of Regents and particularly here in Vermillion, available private housing if that bill were to pass?
I kind of know something about this. I see that it passed out of House Education 8-7, which generally most things pass out of House Education 8-7. So looks like it's prime is Representative Phil Jensen. I can honestly say I haven't dug into this as much. It'll come to the floor at some point here, probably on Tuesday. So we'll dig in this weekend and start understanding it. But I've worked on college campuses, both private and public here at the University of South Dakota and at Mount Marty University, and there is value in having students on campus the first couple of years. They need supports. They need people who are they have. It's a transition. You're going from high school to kind of being on your own. So there's a lot of value in having individuals being able to be provided those supports, having some structure, having some things in place when you come to college, because it is such a significant adjustment. And so, as I kind of look at the bill and kind of understand what we're trying to accomplish with this, just looking back on my own lived experiences of, staying in the dorms, getting to meet people, kind of understanding what's going on, having other people who are in the similar situation versus just coming to college as an 18-year-old and not really knowing anything. I find myself in this camp of, agreeing that we probably need to be doing something to support these students.
Representative Sherman, I want to go to you because this is House bill and stay there. Your thoughts on preventing the Board of Regents from requiring on-campus housing or meal plan and potential secondary impacts on the community or bonding obligations?
I haven't studied that bill. It just came out of committee. Every bill that comes out of committee, we as the Republicans have a caucus and the Dems have a caucus, and we go over the proponent and opponent positions in caucus. So we hear them just like they did in committee, maybe even on a more candid basis because it's a closed room. I don't agree with the sponsor of that bill on very much. So I'll look at it with a little bit of a cautious point of view to see what this means, but I don't have an opinion at this point.
Senator Davis, any thoughts on the House Bill 1193 restricting on-campus housing and meal plans and secondary impacts?
Sure, thanks for the question. Yeah, so as the representative said, it's going to be a little bit till it gets to the Senate, but some of my initial questions are, we currently have waivers available. If students don't want to live on campus, they can apply for a waiver. That process is there. They can, that goes through a process. Housing in general needs are just great in this community and other communities, and finding appropriate housing for families is challenging, and to find housing for I don't know. I got a lot of questions, I guess, but I feel like there's a waiver process in place now, and if students feel so compelled to try to work through that process. I'm not hearing a lot of this I'm questioning who's asking for this. And so that'd be something I'd look to hear the answer to.
Senator Davis, I want to stay with you on the next question because it's a Senate bill and it was considered by the Senate. Senate Bill 100 would preclude the Board of Regents or the technical colleges from restricting carry of a concealed firearm, stun gun, and chemical sprays. That bill was pretty significantly amended to exempt certain facilities on campus like research institutions and places with chemicals and those things, and to require locked storage of the gun when it wasn't being carried. That bill passed the Senate 33-2. You voted yes. So my question to you is, why did you support that bill, and do you have any remaining concerns about the bill?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, it was an interesting bill and debate. 18-year-olds, they can exercise their Second Amendment rights. They can purchase firearms. I felt, the sponsor made the changes. The Senate supported those changes. It included that Dean Fulton did a great job highlighting some of those changes, but it also included they have to have a concealed carry permit, which is a class they have to go through. That's not an easy thing to achieve. You have to sit through some classes and get that designation. I've done a lot of work and a lot of study on sexual assaults on our campus and just in general, some of the violence that can happen. I think there's a balance to be struck in the ability of an 18-year-old to exercise their Second Amendment right responsibly, and if they feel the need to protect themselves, I think this bill threads the needle responsibly.
Representative Sherman, I'll ask you about that. That bill hasn't obviously been considered in the House yet, but thoughts on Senate Bill 100 that would prevent Board of Tech Ed and the Board of Regents from restricting concealed carry on campus in certain instances?
Well, my initial reaction was, I'm leaning toward a no. But I haven't seen all of the amendments. I haven't understood the arguments, so I kind of reserve my right to figure out where I'm going to be on that. Obviously, just anybody and everybody carrying a gun around campus is probably not a good thing. But, this is an advanced concealed carry requirement, which is not just a concealed carry. I've got a concealed carry permit, but it's not an advanced one. So, I'll wait and see what the rest of the amendments are on the bill before we move any further on that. Thank you.
Representative Casson, your thoughts on Senate Bill 100?
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton. Yeah, obviously an interesting topic and difficult topic. I think one of the interesting things in the realities of the legislature is this. There are certain political headwinds that get going on a certain issue, and you might not be able to stop those political headwinds. We had a bill, and I'm going to defer to kind of Representative Shorman. I haven't really dug into this. I just know generally kind of what the case of kind of watching from the House side. We had a bill on the House side recently that talked about residency requirements for basically being a South Dakota resident and to vote. And the sponsor brought this the first week and probably could have passed this bill. And instead, the caucus and several members of our caucus asked the individual, could you go work on your bill? Could you make it better? Would you run it back through a committee? And would you actually then bring forth maybe a better bill? I don't think the bill's perfect. I mean, I don't. I think it's a better solution than we've had in the past years. We've wrestled with this residency requirement. I know this is one gun, but I'll get to the point, Dean. So we've wrestled with this issue for 3 years. This representative did everything we asked him. He went back, he made his bill better, he ran it through a policy committee again, and then it came to the floor. And when you ask somebody to do something like that, and then you say, hey, by the way, we're still not going to support your bill, then at what point is there an incentive to actually do this? As I understand it, the sponsor of the current bill we're talking about did those very same things. She listened to the concerns of her constituents, she listened to the concerns of the stakeholders, she listened to the concerns of her caucus, she made the bill as the best that she felt she could, and then she brought it back. And if we're asking people to do that, if we're asking legislators to do that, when they could potentially pass their bill anyway, and then we don't honor when they've done what we ask, then we put ourselves in a difficult situation of asking moving forward. So that's just some of the realities of how the legislative process works and how we can all work together to perhaps get a better bill.
I'm going to go a little bit over time on education because we have some audience questions, and obviously it's a really significant topic. And I want to combine some audience questions about Senate Bill 51, which would have required display of the Ten Commandments in school classrooms, House Bill 1105 that would have required display of the state seal and state motto. And I'm going to ask the question this way, and certainly welcome you talking about specific bills. Senator Davis, a lot of the theme running through this is the balance of local control for school boards and general state policy with State Department of Education. As you're looking at these bills, how are you trying to strike the balance of local control of education and some of these larger issues?
Thanks for the question. So currently in state law, it says may. School districts can do this already if they wanted to. So, we didn't have school. So then when the state's coming in and saying, no, we're gonna mandate it, we also are gonna mandate curriculum, which generally speaking, the state does not mandate curriculum. We have standards. And 2 years ago, we went, and then it's up to the curriculum directors of each individual school district to write the curriculum. And 2 years ago, we just did all the social studies standards, and it was this huge fight. And so I think to kind of upset the current process for this initiative just didn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, if people wanted to do this, they already could, and we don't mandate curriculum, and this would have been a change in that. Proponents, said that this wasn't about religion and this was about history. Well, then why weren't we mandating it be displayed with all of the other founding documents of our country? I found that peculiar. So I ended up not supporting the bill, and it eventually died in the House.
Representative Castno, go to you, either in the specific context of those couple bills or in general. How are you trying to weigh out local control and state direction on education?
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton. I would say that as I looked around the room during the debates on this and even in caucus, and I looked at about every single person in there, and if they did have a website, on their website it said they were running on local control. And they believed in local control, and they believe on the government that is close to the people is the government that is best. And then all of a sudden, these bills that come that say, okay, we're going to bypass all these different levels of local control in order to say we're going to go to peer and we're going to mandate that you do this. I struggle with that. I struggle with that, particularly on areas, as Senator Davis says. And I'll read to you this. This was what was going to be repealed on the Ten Commandments. And ultimately, it will state, this is what current law is. An object or document containing the words of the Ten Commandments may be displayed in any public school classroom, public school building, or at any public school event along with other objects and documents of cultural, legal, or historical significance that form, and it kind of goes on and on. So when we're talking about things that are already able to be done by the school boards, it's almost like we're bypassing a process. And Senator Davis wasn't able to be there, but Representative Shorman and I had a legislative coffee down in the Dunes area, and there was 30 or 40 people that showed up who had questions and things like that, and it was a really good event. And it's almost like, okay, if this is something that needs to be done, let's start at our local level first, and then we continue to move forward, because at some point, we just can't keep running to peer and saying, hey, can you solve our issues at the local level? I just don't see that as a viable option moving forward.
Representative Sharma, thoughts on either those particular bills or local control allocation generally?
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton. Like I said, I went to a Catholic school for the first 8 years of my education, and of course the Ten Commandments were spoken of a lot and displayed in every classroom. My wife went to public school. Lo and behold, we got married. We're both Christians. How did we get there? Okay? How did we get there? There were different paths to becoming Christians, but not really. We had families that talked to us about praying, saying our bedtime prayers, respecting, religion. So, last year, all of the people that were talking about local control they passed a bill that said we're going to take local control away from the school boards and we're going to mandate that they pay teachers $45,000 a year to start. Now, if you're a teacher, that doesn't sound so bad, okay, but that's taking away local control. On this particular issue, I ended up deciding to vote against it. However, this is something that they may be able to do, and the reason that it was brought is because they're choosing not to do it, or they've chosen to ignore it, okay? I have a plaque that's coming to my house that's about this big by this big, and it's the 10 Commandments. I'm going to go to all 3 school boards and ask them to consider posting it in a place of prominence in the school. It doesn't have to be in every classroom, it doesn't have to be, touted, but it can be displayed. And if that takes place, I will defend in the legislature. They're already doing what you're asking them to do. So you can take a little action and avoid some of these mandates. So that's where I left it. I voted against it.
So I want to shift us now to elections and voting. Representative Cass, I'm going to start with you on a bill where you and Representative Shorma differed ultimately in the end. That was House Bill 1208, which would have created a national voter ballot for those voters who have only a P.O. box or mail service as their connection to the state. That passed the House, as I recall, and if I misstate anyone's record on this, correct me, but Representative Cash and I saw you voted yes, Representative Shorma voted no. Why did you take that position, and do you see any impact on folks who may be snowbirds or significant work travelers in South Dakota? So House Bill 1208 that would have created a national voter ballot.
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton. This is kind of the bill I was referencing in my story in education. That this is something that this legislature has wrestled with, probably predating me. Probably see Senator Art Rush is in it. That this residency question is something that not just for voting, but for hunting licenses and the like, that the legislature wrestles with, and in my 3 years in the legislature has taken up a significant amount of time. The 2 ballot solution that was proposed, again, was something that was asked for by a significant number of folks in our caucus and a significant number of folks who, I have a lot of respect for, that said, hey, can we actually start working to a 2 ballot solution in order to start moving the ball down the field with regards to this issue? Because right now, as it sits, we're kind of stuck in the mud. And do I think the solution is perfect? No. Do I think it's better than it was before? Yes. Am I comfortable with it as it is? Yes. And that's why I voted for the bill. Do I understand some objections? Do I understand why some individuals decided not to support this particular bill? Yeah, I understand completely. But as I said, if we're asking individuals to, and this particular representative went out of his way to try and do what he could to appease the individuals who had concerns about this particular issue, and do what he could do to make the bill the best that he possibly could, and then come back and say, oh, hey, by the way, you did all those things, and we're not going to say that's okay, or we're going to then vote against it. I just found to be a little bit interesting. So I don't fault anybody for how they voted on this. This is a huge issue. This is a big, wide topic, and that you could poke holes in areas all the way along the spectrum on this particular thing. But I just felt like this is a way that we can move the ball down the field on this particular issue, which we've been stuck in the mud now for 3 years.
Representative Shorma, you took a different position on House Bill 1208 that would have allowed a national ballot for the folks with P.O. boxes. A little bit of thought about why and.
Sure. I don't criticize any legislator or how they voted either, except for Legislator Casson. No, seriously, everyone can vote their conscience. Here was my rub on this. That was stated in the presentation of the bill that they allowed the snowbirds to vote on the U.S. senators and the U.S. House members, but not the local elections. Wait a minute, those are our state of South Dakota representatives. Also, he said, well, we had to negotiate that piece in order to get the rest of it. Well, that's a compromise that I don't believe should have been made. Either you're going to have the federal elections for president and vice president on a separate ballot, or you're not. This whole issue of residency needs to be a summer study, and this needs to get all sorted out, because it's used in different ways in different bills throughout law. So we need to nail this down and figure out what truly is residency and not residency. I don't have a problem with a snowbird that registers their vehicle, doesn't live anywhere permanently, has a P.O. box, and they want to vote in federal elections. Okay, if they've got a P.O. box here and that's the only residency they've got, as far as a P.O. box goes, then that's fine, they can vote on the federal elections, but that doesn't mean that that's the U.S. House and Senate, so that's why I vote against it.
Senator Davis, this bill is going across to the Senate. You may get to be the tiebreaker.
Oh, boy.
In the delegation here. Thoughts on a national voter ballot for people with P.O. boxes, mail services, and voting residency generally?
Yeah, this is a topic we continue to hear a lot about in the legislature. It takes up a lot of time. There's a lot of nuances, balancing the rights of everybody's right to vote and balancing the residency requirements. What's an appropriate requirement for residency? How many days does it be? What kind of documents do you have to provide? All of those things. It's hard to thread the needle on that. And I look forward to the debate. I'm not super familiar with this bill yet, and it'll probably be a couple weeks till we see it in the Senate. I'm going to be looking for a balance. I've also leaned into our auditors and our election officials and what they like to see or what they think is workable for them, and taking their advice into account as well.
Senator, I'm going to stick with you to start this one, and it's going to touch on a lot of bills and ask kind of generally as well. South Dakota, the first state in the union to have the initiative process, and there are a number of bills this year that would adjust direct democracy in South Dakota. There are some bills to expand signature requirements to get issues on the ballot. One to require an intervening election on the same constitutional issue if that matter wouldn't pass. And so I want to ask the general question as you look at these, does South Dakota need to adjust its processes on initiative, referenda, and constitutional amendments and direct democracy generally? And if so, how? Talking about either the specifics and the more general issue.
I'll probably stick more general because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of bills that are trying to touch on this, and a lot of them haven't made it to any of my Senate committees or the Senate floor quite yet. So I'm going to try to speak generally since I'm not super up on the details. But I'd be. This last election, we saw 7 ballot measures, I believe, and there's sometimes when legislators are bringing forth, they're bringing legitimate concerns from constituents about so many ballot measures and who's behind them and all these other things. And I just found it enlightening that, the voters ultimately get to decide. And, a lot of I respect those decisions that the voters get to make. There's a lot of fears. People say, oh, well, they can't read everything and they don't know what they're actually voting on. And I don't know, I guess I look to trust the voters on the decisions they're making. I don't know that I necessarily agree with the intervening year or trying to limit some of that stuff, getting really into it. I might be open to the idea of maybe more signatures. I'd be interested to hear the pros and the cons and how we calculate all of that, and maybe if that needs to be looked at. But some of the other details I worry about infringing the idea of the people being able to bring something forward and then putting it to everybody. And I guess as we saw this last election season, a lot of those ideas were rejected by the voters. And so I respect their voice and go from there.
Representative Caston, either specifically on some of those bills or more generally, does South Dakota need to reevaluate direct democracy, and how would you approach that?
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton. And, another very delicate topic that is debated quite frequently at the legislature each year is how do we balance these different things? And I would just simply make this kind of comment as we, because again, this is very large. I firmly believe the Constitution is a sacred document. I think our Constitution is a foundational document to what we do. Clearly, I think all of us do. I think it talks about fundamental principles of how we govern. I think it talks about things like that. I think it's a framework for how government should operate. You know, recently we've started to inject policy in our Constitution, and I don't know if that's the proper place. We have initiated measures. We have other things where policy can do, because policy somewhat changes, ebbs and flows. The document that provides the framework provides a framework for future years, regardless what the policy is. So as we continue to contemplate these things, those that had to do with the Constitution and changes to the Constitution as the framework and the basic fundamental document by which we operate our government, you know, I do think it needs to be held at a higher regard, and I do think it needs to have, you know, higher standards to which we change the Constitution. Now, as we talk about initiated measures and things like that, I mean, those can be changed and altered, but the Constitution is the Constitution for a reason.
Representative Sherman, thoughts on either the specific bills that are in front of you guys this session, or more generally our approach to direct democracy in South Dakota?
South Dakotans love ballot measures on particular issues. They do. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a great vehicle. Changing the Constitution, however, those bills, those measures have largely been funded by out-of-state people. We're a guinea pig for getting a constitutional measure amendment done in this state. And it's too easy for them to come in, ride in, and collect signatures in Sioux Falls and Rapid City and put it on the ballot. It needs to be more difficult than that, I think. What that is, I don't know. I just voted for needing some signatures from every county in the state. I don't know. I think that's not a bad compromise, because these folks that ride in from out of state to have this done, they're going to have trouble doing that. If it's a local constitutional amendment that's being pushed, then they'll gather those signatures, because they will have a groundswell of people from across the state that will work on their behalf. So, yeah, we're not to the end of the day yet on what some of the restrictions of constitutional amendment ballot measures are going to be. But, you know, the regular ballot measures, great. They can be, you know, the nice part about it, when it's not a constitutional amendment, the legislature, just like we do bills that come through the legislature, there are unintended consequences, and we get to tweak those things. If they're brought by the people, we can tweak the unintended consequences if necessary. Thank you.
I want to move us now to property, both, you know, private property rights and also taxes. Representative Cass, I'm going to start this one with you. This week, Governor Roden brought forward Senate Bill 216, which is his framework for property tax adjustment to provide some capping on property tax on owner-occupied property. If you could, give us a little bit of a picture of the framework of that bill, how it's going to impact the larger budget framework, and your position at this point on that bill specifically and property tax adjustment generally.
Thank you, Dean Fulton. I will admit, I have not studied the governor's proposal in depth yet. It's good, like you said, it's a Senate bill. It's going to start on the Senate side. You know, we're in the throes of the appropriation process, and we finally got some budget setting, revenue setting done on Wednesday, and so now we're in the process of really contemplating how best to move forward and putting our House priorities up. So that's kind of taken up my time the last week. So I haven't had the chance to really study what the governor is actually proposing. I know he was working on, you know, on some caps, maybe at the county level, and then really trying to maybe target some certain groups of individuals, some elderly and some other folks that, you know, property taxes might be pricing them out, or homes. Seems like the general idea when he started his little group of legislators that were coming down to try and work on a bill together. Seems like that kind of was the general idea of what he was doing. You know, I have a list of that's just the number of House bills that impact property taxes that were proposed this year. So, I mean, there's several. You know, I understand, and I hear this a lot as we campaign, that the property taxes are a significant concern of many citizens, and I'm hopeful that as we continue over the next 2-3 weeks that we can we can find some solution that does offer property tax relief, in I think should be a significant way.
Representative Sherman, I'm going to stay in the House on this one. Thoughts on Senate Bill 216, if you've had a chance to look at that, and Governor Roden's framework, or just the larger issue of trying to fit property tax in our larger allocation of tax burdens in South Dakota?
Yeah, thank you. I've read over the governor's proposal once, and I've read some articles that explain certain pieces of it. There is a maximum income that has been raised from what it currently is to 55,000, I think, or 65,000. There is a maximum valuation of a home at 500,000. But I haven't seen a fiscal impact on what he has proposed, so I can't tell you what the savings or what the impact on property tax revenue is, and that's a big thing to consider. I'm not a fan of the bill that was proposed to increase sales tax to 5%. I think that's a shift of tax from property owners to non-property owners. Who are the majority of non-property owners? Low to moderate income people. It's a shift of tax to the low to moderate income people who we think we're trying to help in this state most of the time. So I've just not been a fan, but that bill, I think, is not going to get any footing. So the governor brought forth he met with a group of 10 people that are concerned about the property taxes in the House and the Senate, and they had conversations and he put together a proposal. And, hopefully, it's a good blend of things. I just don't have enough information to defend it.
Senator Davis, your thoughts on any chance you've had to look at Senate Bill 216, Governor Roden's framework of the larger issue of balancing property tax burdens?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We'll hear this in Senate Tax in the next week or so, and so I'm looking forward to hearing more of the details. And we've been listening to several property tax bill hearings, and we've been deferring action on them. They all are trying to accomplish similar things, but in different ways, and it's a difficult topic to strike the balance because ultimately there's a shift somewhere. And the biggest takeaway from Governor Roden's plan that I've understood is that this is looking to kind of reset where that shift in essentially he feels and what they feel this work group is that there's been a shift as owner-occupied home values have increased in areas, especially out in the Black Hills and the Sioux Falls area, with the ballooning of growth in those areas. Those home evaluations have risen quite a bit more, and ag land and commercial land and all of those evaluations have stayed relatively steady. And so this shift is really an attempt to rebalance that so that ag and commercial are paying more of their fair share. And so that's, for me, that's somewhat of the easiest way to kind of explain what maybe this is trying to accomplish. Again, with the increase in the income limits that Representative Shorman mentioned about. But at the end of the day, what drives property taxes is your local budgets. The school budget, the county budget, that is what your property taxes pay for. None of these property taxes go to the state. They all fund the local budgets. And so another thing to just really realize is that if you wanted to, decrease property taxes, you got to decrease the need. And we also hear about the need of our schools and our counties and their lack of revenue and ability to fund their needed things. So it's a balance.
Thank you. Representative Sherman, I want to start this question for you. In the last couple of sessions and the last election, we've seen a lot of discussion about private property rights, eminent domain, linear projects, all these things. This session, House Bill 1052 was introduced to prohibit the exercise of eminent domain by pipelines for carbon dioxide, and it passed the House 49 to 19. You and Representative Cashman took different positions on this bill. Talk to us about why you took the position you did on that bill. And Senator Davis, I'll obviously asking you for what your position will be. So House Bill 1052.
Sure. Non-controversial bill. I'll tell you what I said when I spoke on the floor. Last October-ish, the Supreme Court said that carbon dioxide is not a commodity, therefore it cannot be used for eminent domain. If they were to bring forth demonstrate that it could be, that is someplace in the future. Today, it's not available to be used as for eminent domain. So why are we wasting the legislature's time talking about eminent domain on pipelines? It doesn't exist. It's not an option. There's been a couple of other things to reinforce that. Again, why? Well, I'm perplexed as to why, other than a lot of people ran for office based on the fact that they were against eminent domain for carbon pipelines. And when the Supreme Court made that decision, they continued to campaign to the bitter end that I'm for personal property rights and I'm against eminent domain, and that's why you ought to vote for me. So now they gotta have a bill. Okay, that's fine. It passed. Those people that ran on that basis got it passed. It has no effect on the pipeline project. None. The people that are being signed up right now are being signed up without the use of eminent domain. So there are about 20 landowners that are adamantly against it. That's their choice. People in the House say, we're not against the pipeline, we're just against the use of eminent domain. Well, now there are bills that are coming forth that say you can't build a pipeline in the state of South Dakota. So obviously that was just a shell game. So anyway, it brings, that pipeline will bring, I testified to this on the floor, just in the increased value of corn, $500 million a year to the state of South Dakota. That's a lot of money that we can use for a lot of different things. You get additional tax dollars, additional churning of those dollars that go to the farmers that spend them at the implement dealers in the small towns. Ethanol plants are located in small towns and their employees live there. They're going to spend it there. That's where those dollars are going to come from for low carbon aviation, jet fuel, and so on. So I'm a business guy. I looked at it from a business perspective. I understand property rights, and I understand that there are times when you have to look at the bigger picture and decide whether it is of value enough to build something like that. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Representative Caston, you took a different approach to House Bill 1052 that would prohibit eminent domain by COT pipeline projects. Tell us why.
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton. You know, I kind of was looking around the room, you know, and you know, our caucus, and I just kind of think of myself, every single person in this room of our Republican caucus values property rights. And so I wanted to kind of just make sure I make that statement. So there's a principle that we kind of live by as legislators, that we just vehemently attack ideas. We can debate, we have contentious arguments, we have just raucous debates about ideas. What we don't do is we don't attack people. And it seems to me over my time in the legislature that this particular issue is people attack each other. We have neighbors that don't talk to other neighbors. We have friends that don't talk to other friends. We have people who are just not who would agree 95% to 99% of the time that don't speak anymore over this particular issue. And if some point as a state and as a community or as a neighbor or as a legislature, if we're going to move forward, we have to find a way to move forward. And if this issue is the one that's going to divide us, my thing is, as somebody who wants to protect property rights, what's the default? And Representative Shorma mentioned the default. The default is eminent domain cannot be used for carbon sequestration. And that's why I went back to, okay, the eminent domain cannot be used for carbon sequestration. As it currently sits, we need to move on as a state, and therefore I supported the bill.
Senator Davis, that bill is headed over to you. Your thoughts on House Bill 1052 that would prohibit eminent domain by carbon dioxide pipelines?
Yeah, thanks for the question. we will probably still not hear this for a little bit yet, as the Senate's prioritizing Senate bills with an upcoming crossover deadline. So I think that's just important to note. But I have some concerns about eminent domain carve-outs and how this is targeting a specific project. Our eminent domain laws are written to apply to commodities. And so I guess I'm just kind of asking the question, so why are we targeting a project? Why are we creating this carve-out? If the current law is that they can't have eminent domain, or Supreme Court rulings are that they're not eligible, why are we so worried? And then a question that I am looking forward to being answered in the debate in the Senate is, what happens if it is deemed a commodity? If we pass, let's say we pass this law, it's signed, all that, what happens then if it is deemed a commodity? And so is that going to create a lawsuit situation? Is that going to cost taxpayer dollars? I have a lot of questions yet about that, and just concerns about just targeting the project in general. Eminent domain reform is very difficult to do. It's been tried to, attempted the last several years, and it's hard to do because you end up affecting things like water and electricity and the commodities that everybody uses. And so that's what we'll look forward to the debate in the Senate.
Thank you. Representative Cassidy, I want to start this one with you because it's one of your bills, House Bill 1108 on the McCook Lake Authority. Obviously, we all know that last year that area suffered some significant devastation during the major flooding. And so my question to you is, House Bill 1108 would provide the McCook Lake Authority for some response down there. And there's also an audience question about potential available HUD funding. So my question to you is, your assessment of the prospects for House Bill 1108 in a tough budget environment, and also any other alternatives you see for potential federal funding or working with the delegation to respond to the damage to the McCook Lake area.
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton, and I'm going to do my best to keep this under 2 minutes because I could talk for 30 minutes on this issue with regards to McCook Lake, and virtually all of the flooding to southeast South Dakota is utilizing all of the above approach, whether it's HUD funding, whether it's some of the FEMA funding that came in, whatever. We want to utilize all the funding available that we can to help the citizens impacted. This bill as written, and it's a very as nuanced as an appropriation bill can be because they're generally boring, but it's kind of a nuanced appropriation bill that basically provides a backstop. Right now, Game Fish and Parks is working on an RFP to clean up McCook Lake, which again is a state-owned lake. There's a distinction here. This is a state-owned lake. This isn't private property. This is a state-owned lake. And this is, the Game Fish and Parks is working on RFP to clean up that lake. And the scope of that work and the amount of dollar figure in order that's going to go to clean up the lake has not yet been determined and will not yet be determined by the time we're done with session. So the point of this bill was to provide a backstop. The point of this bill is also to kind of push Game Fish and Parks to kind of get things going and get things moving to help clean up this lake. But this isn't, we're not stopping with this bill, and nor is this bill the end-all be-all of efforts that I think we should be doing at a state level or any level in order to help these individuals that were impacted. You know, I have visions on a working after session with several folks and agencies on a larger scale, because right now, outside of FEMA and some emergency response to public projects, the state really has no program to help individual citizens that are impacted by something so terrible as this, or a tornado, or a derecho, or those kinds. We just don't have anything, and I think we fail our citizens by not having anything. And I want this to have a further impact beyond just this as we move forward, and not just for southeast South Dakota, but for the entire state, that we have a disaster relief program that can help citizens maybe when they're having the worst day of their life.
Senator Davis, if HB 1108 makes it across the Senate, your assessment of the prospects for 1108 and just generally what else might be available to respond to McCook Lake?
Yeah, thank you. As we talked a little bit more about one-time spending of priorities and things that might be our priorities are sometimes difficult to get all the other 105 legislators to recognize the importance of that too. But Rest assured, we're working very hard to highlight the devastation and the importance of trying to move things forward for this community. And I know there's frustrations that it's not enough, and in that FEMA individual assistance wasn't enough. And the reality is it's difficult to make some of these individuals whole with the amount of loss that happens in these disasters. I appreciate Representative Caston's leadership on this, and look forward to working with him and in the agencies to try to move things forward. These things take time. There was some mention about some HUD grants. Those are some federal grants for some housing and community revitalization, and I'm working very closely with the Governor's Office of Economic Development to get, they are working through the application process. They are they gave me a little bit of insight on what that process looks like. It looks like sitting through required seminars to make sure that they are to even apply. It's very cumbersome. There's a lot of hoops for them to jump through. They understand the urgency and the importance. One thing that as I came to the legislature, I quickly realized and have a greater appreciation for how slow government works. And it's frustrating. Our state honestly moves faster than the feds. And and that too is very frustrating, but we're doing what we can as to advocate for the community, the people that are involved. I just ask for your patience, and I know it's been a long road, and we're really doing our best. And so good things take time, and again, ask for the community's patience.
Ma'am. Representative Shorma, your response on what it takes to get House Bill 1108 across the finish line, or any other resources that can be brought to bear to respond to the devastation of McCook Lake.
Well, over the last 3 years, we brought 3 separate bills dealing with issues at McCook Lake. The last year, it was to replace the 700, was it 700 feet of pipe? Yeah. 7,000 feet of pipe? Yeah, whatever, from McCook Lake to Missouri River to pump water into McCook Lake. That pipe was used to pump water out of McCook Lake this year. That's not in good shape. And it puts the future success, and by the way, that bill died last year. It was close. It was like 7-6 in committee against it. This year, the bill that Chris brought forth and that I co-sponsored was for this backstop to the $1.5 million Game Fish and Parks is looking at improving the lake with. That's a separate issue from money to go to individual people that were impacted. My heart aches for those folks. I sat in on a lot of North Sioux City meetings understanding how badly they were impacted. It's terrible. And I pray for folks over there. I know that it was terrible. There is not a fund today for an emergency fund. That's what Representative Caston is talking about. There are other states around us that have some money in those funds that go to individuals when they're impacted, but we do not. So where do we start? We start by setting up a fund like that. It'll be a trust, and we'll be living off of the interest earned in that trust. So it's going to take an accumulation of money over time to get that up to a point where it can really be helpful. I know the people that at McCook Lake that were impacted don't have time. There's been a lot of things that have been done to bring the infrastructure and other things up to speed, getting them repaired, the street that goes by the high school and by the properties, the water, sewer, other infrastructure that the city has been working on. There's other things that have been done, but that doesn't help the individual property owners, and I know that. This bill, there was not a bill brought forth to help the citizens. We're 3 people out of 105 in the legislature. That would have been seen as a constituent bill, and it would have died. So that's where that's at.
Thank you. I want to move us now to issues regarding health and social services. Senator Davis, I want to start with you on a bill that you have introduced and that made it through Senate Judiciary the other day. and that's Senate Bill 156 that would increase the age of marriage in South Dakota to 18. Talk to us about why that bill and what you see for the prospects in the full Senate.
Thanks for the question. Might seem like an obscure bill to bring forward, but it's an issue that as I learned more about, I just felt really strongly about advocating for a vulnerable population, our minors. Right now we have a legal loophole that allows parents, one parent, to consent to a 16 or 17-year-old to get married. And on the surface, I think it sounds okay, and we want to believe that a lot of parents have the best interest of their child and trust them to do so. The reality of it is it creates this legal nightmare for minors if they seek recourse. Maybe they start to get abused, maybe things aren't going well between that marriage, and they're looking to seek shelter, seek a divorce. And the reality is we did a legal carve-out for a age group that we don't really give a lot of legal rights to because they're minors. And so it becomes an issue when minors can't go to domestic violence shelters unaccompanied. They have nowhere to go. I had testimony from individuals that one was being abused. She was married at 16, 17, tried running away from home. The cops returned her to her husband. She couldn't go and get a restraining order. The only way she was able to get a restraining order was when her mom physically finally came over to the house and witnessed her husband beating her. Her mom then could take her to go get a restraining order. I understand opponents' concerns about parental rights and choice in this. Again, it's just an issue that as I learned more, the statistics and the data just indicate that a lot of these marriages end 70 to 80% end in divorce. I understand there are individuals that make it and have happy unions, and I think we all can maybe think of one of those individuals in our life, but they are the minority, and we don't hear about the sad stories. I realize it's not going to end all abuse, but when we see an opportunity to protect individuals, the 70 to 80% that maybe this wasn't a good idea for them and they have no legal recourse, we need to advocate for them. And I realize my time is up, but we had testimony from Call to Freedom, human trafficking. There's elements in that that I could go into details about, but we'll hear this on the Senate floor, and I appreciate the Judiciary Committee for giving the survivors the opportunity to testify in committee.
Representative Schirmer, if that bill makes it across, your thoughts on its prospects in the House and your position on increasing the age of marriage to 18 for all people in South Dakota?
Thank you, Dean Fulton. It's gaining a lot of, there's a lot of learning going on this particular subject, and that's really great. Groups have shown up and are talking to us in the halls, and Senator Davis, of course, I respect her a lot as a legislator, and I appreciate that she brought this bill forth because it gave us an opportunity to learn a lot about it. I was 20 when I got married. My wife was 19, and as I said before, we've been married for 49 years. We got married too young. I mean, today, I will tell you that that's pretty young. My children got married a little bit later, not a lot later, a little bit, 26, 27, 30. I think that's better because they have more life experiences and they can, not rush into things. So anyway, it doesn't mean that every marriage that happens after a week after they met is going to end up in divorce, but the odds are against it. Younger people getting married, the odds are against them. So I think this is a good way, especially since minors don't have a lot of rights in that respect. Thank you.
Representative Caston, your assessment of the prospects of Senate Bill 156 in the House and your position on increasing the age of marriage to 18.
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton. I'll just be brief on this. I know last year this bill was brought in and ultimately died in House State Affairs. But to the senator's point and then the representative's point, has been really talked about, and this issue has been really brought to light over the last year with emails and different kind of Zoom calls and webinars that we could attend to try and understand this issue in a larger scale. So I'll just reserve reserve my thoughts and judgment until this makes it to the House, if this makes it to the House side.
I want to stick with you, Representative Cass, and ask about, there are a group of bills that regard age verification for minors utilizing certain websites and applications. Taking the issue on generally or in the context of specific bills, talk to us about your approach to balancing free expression concerns for the operators of those apps and protecting minors for harmful content in the context of these various bills that would require age verification for certain social media platforms, pornography, and other things like that.
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton. Again, a very sensitive subject and something that, you know, we've talked a lot about in the legislature this year, as you said. We had a bill, I believe Representative Zoe had a bill that passed the House on this very same thing. I believe the Senate has maybe a similar bill, or maybe has the same bill. This came out of a summer study this summer to address exactly the issues that we're doing. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I have kids that are 11 and 8, and there are just certain things that I just don't think they should be seeing. And so, you know, I supported that bill, and I'll continue to weigh the rights of parents versus the rights of freedom of expression as we move forward. But as that particular bill was voted on and contemplated, you know, I just felt that it was a pretty good step towards, you know, protecting our vulnerable children.
Senator Davis, your thoughts on the various bills that would require age verification and striking the balance of free expression and protecting minors?
Yeah, thanks for the question. As Representative Casson mentioned, this is a topic that the legislature is taking very seriously in wanting to get it right, as you're trying to balance free expression, the legalities and things like that. As you can, in the previous question, you can tell that I feel passionately about protecting vulnerable populations. And so I think on the Senate side, the summer study legislation, it hasn't gotten to our Senate floor yet. I'm looking forward to the debate and hearing more about it. It hasn't been in front of any of my committees, so I can't speak to all the details maybe between the differences of the House bill and the Senate bill, but broadly speaking, I'm supportive of the legislation. I feel like the summer study did a great job of trying to weigh in, bring stakeholders together and address concerns, including the Attorney General, things like that.
Representative Sharma, your thoughts on various bills that would require age verification and how we strike that balance?
One of my daughters has a rule in her house that her kids don't get a cell phone until they're 16. They still have access to the internet and so on and other things. And of course, if they ride the bus, it's everywhere. Every kid has a cell phone. They're doing things they shouldn't be doing. I think we should have ways to protect kids from growing up too quickly and being exposed to things that they wouldn't normally be exposed to until they're older in age. So I don't know how the controls are set up. Do you have to click on something to say I'm an adult? Well, then the kids can click on it and say they're adults too. So how can we set this up so that it is pretty airtight? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think some of the things that are being proposed are steps moving in that direction. So yeah, I would support that.
I want to ask one more question on health and social services before we move to a more open discussion, invite some audience questions. And this is a Senate bill. So Senator Davis, I'm going to start with you. Senate Bill 186 would eliminate daylight savings times. Thoughts on eliminating daylight savings time?
I didn't even know this bill was out there, but with young kids, and I'll just tell you, those transitions, that 1 hour of sleep makes a big difference sometimes. So I guess, I don't know. I don't know that it serves a purpose as much as it used to back in the day. So again, I'll look forward to the debate, but I'm probably leaning forward toward getting rid of it, so.
Representative Sherman, on behalf of everyone who either arrived an hour early or several minutes late for church, eliminating daylight savings time.
I served in the Senate for a year when I was appointed to fill Dan Lederman's seat when he left, with 1 year left on his term. Betty Olson, who's from out west, brought this bill every year that she was in the legislature. I think it's probably been brought every year since. it always fails. Honestly, I don't really care one way or the other. I mean, really, I like the extra hour of daylight in the summertime because you don't get home until, 5:30, 6 o'clock, whatever, and it's nice to be able to work out in the yard a little longer. I don't like it getting so dark in the wintertime so early. So, it's gives and takes. I don't have a preference one way or the other. I hope this thing just fails, or it doesn't matter. Even if it passes, that's fine, whatever.
Representative Casson, your thoughts on daylight savings time?
Yeah, I'll just be brief. Sometimes in Pierre, I just think to myself, we're really solving some really big problems.
So I'll move us to open topics, invite some audience questions. I'm going to start with one question. While we do that, I would ask that anyone in the audience who has a question raise their hand, and one of the VCDC staff will identify you and bring you forward. We're going to ask guests to keep questions to 30 seconds and one question per guest. So while folks in the audience get set if they have audience questions, I'm going to pose to you, and I'll start with you, Representative Casson. Is there a bill or issue that we haven't touched on yet today that you see as particularly important, and why?
Yes, and I'm glad we can get to talk to this. So one thing as we contemplated the financials in the beginning, there's a lot of one-time money because of unclaimed property, and unclaimed property is really the great unknown in state government. There's just not a lot of people that truly understand unclaimed property. I'm the prime sponsor, along with Senator Howard in the Senate, on basically setting up an unclaimed property trust fund. It's not a new idea. I could imagine when Dean Fulton was chief of staff, this was something that was talked about then. But when he was chief of staff, there was very little unclaimed property. This year in unclaimed property receipts, there's going to be over $311 million. That's a lot of money. We budgeted $60 million, and we're going to go into $311 million. This is creating where we're having this additional one-time funding. And my belief is we have $1.2 billion in liabilities to the state in unclaimed property. We're utilizing these receipts to pay off those liabilities. So in essence, one could make the argument, these are unfunded liabilities to our state. By creating this trust fund, and again, this isn't going to be the most talked about bill of the session, certainly nothing, I don't want to get patted on the back for this, but consequential to moving the state forward, if we can create this unclaimed property trust fund in a very responsible way, we can relieve the state of the habit of using these unfunded liabilities and actually fund these using this trust fund, and actually have a better, more responsible way of budgeting moving forward. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you. Senator Davis, a bill or an issue that we haven't touched on that you think is particularly important, and why?
I feel like we've done a good job of covering a variety of topics. We get, there's 200 and some bills introduced in the Senate alone. I think similar on the House side, so 400 and some bills, ideas that get heard. You name it, it's out there. Daylight savings time, etc. The budget for me is just really quite the issue, the balancing the cuts, deciding what to save, if we're going to spend, the prison. There's a big question mark, and all that's to be decided yet. And so I just welcome anyone to reach out to me, visit with me if you have more specific issues you want to talk about. Thanks.
Representative Sherman, any bill or issue that we haven't touched on today that you think is particularly important, and why?
Well, one that was important to me and important to some of my constituents, the sheriffs, the police, was to tighten up the verbiage for driving hands-free when you're talking on the cell phone. I don't have a problem with people making a phone call or receiving a phone call on a cell phone if it's hands-free. Don't have to look down at your phone. You can just speak through. If you don't have if you don't have a car that's equipped with that kind of technology so that it comes through the radio, get yourself a set of earbuds and tie your phone to it. You can lay your seat on the car, you can lay your phone in the car seat with the speakerphone on and speak hands-free. The sheriffs, the police, they all agree this is a rising problem. This was brought to me by a person over in Yankton who was run off the road by an individual who was looking down at their cell phone, multiple times came over into her lane, partly until they got right in front of her and pulled completely into her lane, and in fact, even a little bit beyond her lane, and she ended up going in the ditch. The good news was there wasn't an approach or a culvert or a sign that she hit, but it has changed her life. When they drive on the highway, her husband drives, and she looks at the eyes of the oncoming car driver to see if they're paying attention. Driving out to Pier at least once a trip, if not 4 or 5 times a trip, there are cars that are wandering, there are trucks that are wandering. It's not just limited to car drivers. And this is a real issue. And all we were trying to do was take some of you can't enter in a person's information for a phone number that you're going to dial when you're driving. We reduced that. We took some of those things out that said, oh, I wasn't texting. I was entering a person's number, and that's acceptable. So then the police can't issue them a ticket. But it is a type 1, it's classified as a type 1 issue, so you can get pulled over if they notice it. Now, a seatbelt, you can't. It has to be for another reason. So I brought that bill. It passed out of committee this time. Yay! But it got killed on the floor. I don't understand what the issue is, but thank you.
Thank you. Take our first audience question. We ask to please keep the question to 1 question in 30 seconds.
Okay. Do you want my name? No? I'm Randine.
That's up to you.
Randine Miller, and I live here in Vermillion, and I'm a retired special education teacher. As the federal Department of Education is being dismantled, what are your specific plans to ensure our students with special needs will continue to have their educational needs met in a least restrictive environment as dictated by their individual education plans?
And I'll rotate the start on this one. Representative Sturm will give the first question to you.
Well, my expectation is the state will run its own budget for education. So we will still have the responsibility then of making sure where the dollars that now come to us from the state that are not forwarded out to the federal government to cover some of the Department of Education costs. I don't know whether they're going to dissolve the Department of Education or not, but if those funds, excuse me, then end up coming back to the state, we'll have those dollars to spread around. Thank you.
Senator Davis, your response if we have restrictions on the Federal Department of Education responding to special education.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this. I've heard the concerns as well, and how that funding that comes for those programs, where is that going to come from? My understanding is that funding is not necessarily going to go away from the federal government, that it's just maybe going to be rerouted through maybe a different department if this does happen. And ultimately, it's going to fall on the backs of the state and the obligation we have to educate every child. So I appreciate your concern. It's something we're watching. It's not something that's, given the federal nature of it, it's not something that we talk about a lot right now at the legislature, but it's certainly something everyone's watching. So.
Representative Caston responding if there are federal changes to education and special education student funding.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the question. It just as I think in a lot of our cases and across the different bills and the different things, different funding areas that we have, I think we continue to be an advocate for those vulnerable individuals in our society. So I will continue to do that.
Next audience question will begin with you, Senator Davis, on this one.
Excuse me, mine's also an education question. And I guess it goes back to the vouchers. And I guess my question is, why is this still an issue? There are two sections in 2 different articles in the Constitution of South Dakota that clearly state, and I quote, no money or property of the state shall be given or appropriated for the benefit of any sectarian or religious society or institution. That's in Article 6. Section 3 of the Bill of Rights of the State of South Dakota Constitution. Article 8, which is the Education and School Land article, Section 16 says, public support of sectarian institutions prohibited. No appropriations of land, money, or other properties or credits to aid any sectarian school shall ever be made by the state or any county or municipality within the state, nor shall the state or any county or municipality within the state accept any grant, convenience, gift, or bequest of the lands, money, or other property to be used for sectarian purposes, and no sectarian instruction shall be allowed in any school or institution aided or supported by the state. Clearly, it states that.
So,
I also would-
sir, that's the question. Senator Davis, the question to you is, why is there persistence on the issue of public funding for private education, or how it might relate to South Dakota's Blaine Amendment, which restricts that use of funds?
Thanks for the question. The education bills that are, asking for vouchers, you'd have to ask those sponsors that are bringing those forward. I don't see anyone up here that's sponsoring that legislation. And ultimately, I think our representative process that we have in the legislature is balancing the voices of the constituents that they represent, the people that they represent, and bringing that forth. And effectively, that legislation has died. This is part of our process where every bill gets a hearing in South Dakota, whether it's a constitutional idea or unconstitutional idea on multiple topics. And I appreciate you bringing up the topic again and the concern. And effectively, those bills are working through the process and are not being successful. So,
Representative Casson, the Blaine Amendment, or why the persistence on public funding for private education?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. The reasons why they're being brought, I don't know. I mean, every legislator has an ability to bring any bill they want. And so, unfortunately, and we can probably go into some bills that they bring aren't constitutional, and that's their right, and they can be, if we're told, hey, a bill you're going to bring is going to conflict with state law over here or potentially be unconstitutional, ultimately it's up to that individual legislator to push the button if they want to bring the bill forward. Whether it's unconstitutional, whether it conflicts with state statute, whether those things, that's up to that individual legislator who was elected by, the folks in their district. So to Senator Davis's point, I don't know the motivations behind it. I know the feelings that I have on this issue. I know the feelings that I've had from individuals in this community, in our district, on this issue. And, I will vote that way if this was ever to be taken to a vote of the full House.
Representative Sharma, thoughts on why this issue persists and the state constitutional limits?
Well, who we elect is an important responsibility. And some of the people that ran for office this time ran on the basis of wanting vouchers for schools. Their constituents elected them. It doesn't mean it's constitutional. It doesn't mean that it fits into state law. It just means that that's what they got elected on. So they're bringing a bill. It's up to the majority of the people in the legislature to make sure that things that are not constitutional or that don't make sense or are mandates for different things that shouldn't be done don't get passed.
Thank you. Our next question will begin with Representative Casson. Ma'am, your question.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Lampert. I live in Vermillion, South Dakota. I wanted to ask you about a series of discriminatory laws that are currently before the House that are attacking a very vulnerable minority of our citizens. And I want to start by thanking you, Representative Sharma and Kaysen, for voting against HB 1201, which was another of these discriminatory laws targeting gender-expansive students. So HB 1259 is, I think, the 5th iteration of a bathroom bill. This one has sweeping scope for all state facilities, restricting bathroom use by sex, making facilities very dangerous for trans people, and banning trans people from using facilities that match their identity. Vermillion School District, as you may know, has an inclusive bathroom policy, and there, to my knowledge, have been no issues related to that policy in our school district.
I'd like to ask you to get
HB
to the question,
1260 restricts all legal documentation to reflecting biological sex and denies trans people legal recognition. And so I guess my question is, what prevailing interest in our state are these bills serving, and what are the problems they are trying to address?
Representative Casson, that question goes to you, issues that may be sought to address through these types of bills.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And, it kind of goes back to the answer to the last question, right? I mean, I don't question the intentions of other legislators and what they're doing. To Representative Shormer's point, They have constituents who are pushing them to do things. Maybe they have their own ideas. I don't know. I don't know the intent. All I know is that when a bill comes before me and and I guarantee they'll do the same way, I contemplate the pros and the cons of the bill that's in front of me and try and make the best decision that I can moving forward. I think if we're going to try and get into the intentions of certain legislators and what they want to do, I mean, I can't tell you what they're or why they're doing what they're doing.
Representative Sherma, your thoughts on the motivations behind some of these types of bills?
And your position on
And your position on these bills?
Well, I think I've already voted my position. Again, the intentions of why people bring bills are, they have every right to bring whatever bill they want, and every bill gets a hearing. That doesn't mean that the majority of the legislature or there's a predominance of feeling behind those things in the state that we're supportive of those kinds of things. So, you know, the result is that proof is in the pudding. When we get if those bills pass, then you'll have an idea of where the state really stands as a majority. But again, it takes 36 to pass a bill and 36 to kill it. So we've killed a lot of bad bills already this year. And for whatever reason, there seems like there's been more bad ones than good ones. Thank you.
Senator Davis, your thoughts on the motivations behind bills like this and your position?
I can't speak to the intentions of others, but I know this is many topics that the legislature continues to revisit. It's frustrating because we've got a lot of work to do in a short amount of time. Sometimes these bills pass and fail based on how they're written. I will be interested to see what kind of form they come over to the Senate in. And as usual, I'll be weighing whether or not do we need a law on this? What kind of problems is this solving? How many people is this affecting? And are there unintended consequences like lawsuits and things like that? I had concerns about the counseling bill that died in the House, and so I'm glad that it found proper disposal that way, because I just think, again, that there was a matter of some things being written, and my mom was a counselor and social worker for 20 years, and so just value the service that they provide. I hope that answers your question. It really depends on details as it approaches the Senate, but again, those will be the lenses that I'll be looking at it with.
Thank you. Our next question will be to you, start with you, Representative Shorma. And
Hi,
30
Valerie
seconds for a question.
Valerie Howard, I live in Vermillion, South Dakota. On June 23rd, 2024, William Shorma met with the City Council from North Sioux City, the State Emergency Management, and the Mayor, the Governor's Office was there. They all, later in that day, voted to put a $1 million berm across I-29. They shoved a bunch of water through McCook. Don't you think ethically, morally, since this was a purposeful choice to throw the water across the interstate, don't you think that the state should be helping? The city is not, the county is not, FEMA did, they were wonderful, but don't you think morally and ethically the state should be helping for something that the dunes normally always floods? Somehow, magically, they didn't flood.
Your question, Representative Shorma, should the state be doing more to respond at McCook Lake?
I think the state should be doing more to respond to every crisis. If you look at the map of inundation, without the berm, it would have gone the same way. What happens is the water went cross-country north of that berm.
Ma'am?
Let me answer. The water went north of that berm cross-country, and it would have ended up going through McCook Lake, maybe not quite as severely, but enough to cause the same kind of inundation. I said my heart aches for the people that were affected by this. The decision to put that berm there was to save North Sioux City, and it did that. But I don't think it did that at the expense of McCook Lake, because it would have happened that way either way. So I think there's more that can be done. I wish that there was money available that we could make all those people whole. I wish there was money available we could make every crisis, people that were impacted by a crisis, the derechos, the tornadoes, the whatever, whole. When somebody wrecks their car in a snowstorm, let's make them whole. It isn't possible. There's not enough money in the world to make everybody whole for a crisis. This was not a crisis that was caused by the state. This was a 1,000-year flood. That river was not a river flooding 7 feet above the all-time crested high ever. It was a lake that came down from the north and could not be contained by anything that humans have done to direct that water. It had a mind of its own and went cross-country on its own. So, you know, I feel terrible for the people that were affected. I wish we could do more. We continue to try to do more. The opinion is we're not doing enough. I understand that. I would probably be speaking the same way you're speaking if my house had been affected.
Thank you. Senator Davis, should we be doing more at McCook Lake and what?
I think, you know, your concerns are being heard. We've had numerous conversations personally, many times. We're doing everything we can. And like I said, some of these things, the requirements, the burdens that are put on local governments to participate in the grants and the programs that are available, they take time and they have requirements and things they have to comply with to be eligible. And I don't make those rules. I do my best to advocate for the community, be there. I drove through when North Shore was reopened several days after it reopened. It is absolutely devastating. Nobody is arguing that. And we have ideas that we want to work on for future disaster plans and relief. But again, this stuff takes time, and if we want to be successful, we have to approach it in the way and within the bounds and the rules that we're obligated to do so. So I thank you for continuing to lift up the voices of those affected. Again, I'll just reiterate, we hear you and we continue to do what we can from a state level. Thank you.
Representative Casson, what more can we try and do from McCook Lake?
Yeah, thank you, Dean Fulton, and thank you for the question. And, you know, as Senator Davis said, several conversations on this very issue, and we continue to have this we're going to continue to have conversations on this issue. And as I said in my answer about what we're trying to do with the McCook Lake, you know, contingency fund, if you will, and that's kind of what it is to again, to start the process of cleanup, start the process of highlighting these issues and pushing individuals to take action. And I know, you know, I mean, even on just the McCook Lake side, not just the property owner side, the McCook Lake side, you know, this thing has started. We talked about this RFP in October. We talked about this RFP in November. We talked about it in December. We talked about it in January. Here it is February, and we're still not having something. So, you know, I understand your frustrations. I think these things do. I think these tragedies break all of our hearts, and I think it does show gaps in our system. And as I said, you know, as we continue to move forward, you know, whether it's the three of us or just me, or, you know, this is a huge issue when you're talking about disaster relief across an entire state. And, you know, I want to make sure that in, whether it's your families or anybody else's family in this room, or anybody in Ipswich, or anybody in Belle Fourche, or anybody in wherever that has a major catastrophe like this, there is some sort of a safety net beyond just what the state offers now, which is just for public projects, and beyond what FEMA does, and that's begging for individual assistance. Will I be successful? I have no idea. Am I going to try? Heck yes, I'm going to try. You know, is it going to impact and help your family? No. But if it happens again, might help somebody else in this room. So that's the goal. I mean, again, I've told you, my heart breaks for this whole situation. It breaks for everybody else impacted by this, and we're going to continue to work on it.
We have one final question from the audience. We have a final question from the audience, and Senator Davis, this question will start with you.
Thanks, Doug Cronin. Ending things with a vaccine question. What year is it? House Bill 1223 that just passed out of committee. It's a vaccine conscience bill. Is a bill that would allow, or it would prevent state agencies, political subdivisions, or people from permitting someone entry to an event because of their vaccination status. The language in it that involves individuals, persons, not being allowed to screen someone's vaccination status to come into a private event or come into their private home. The implications of that, that's the question I have with you. How do you feel about these vaccine conscience bills, and what is my personal responsibility to accommodate somebody who chooses not to get a vaccine?
Senator Davis, your position on House Bill 1223 that would create a conscience objection for public vaccination requirements.
I've heard a little bit about this bill. Again, it's on the House side. It's not immediately in front of me. I haven't heard the pros and cons. I've heard there's some concerns. And so certainly I've been a huge fan of public health and advocate of health and responsible vaccination policy. And so I leaning towards, based on some of the concerns that I've heard on this bill, leaning towards not supporting this, but we'll see what kind of form it gets into in front of me in Senate Health and Human Services, if and when it does, and I appreciate you raising the concerns and questions.
Representative Caston, House Bill 1223, which narrowly passed its first committee, your position on that bill that would create a conscience exception for public vaccination requirements.
Yes, thank you, Dean Fulton, and thank you for the question. And in preparation for session, there was a thought that this bill would be coming. So had some prior conversations to session about this, and kind of just in an interesting way. This particular bill actually would reduce the number of people who are exempted from vaccinations in kind of a weird way based upon our current laws, as I understand it now. I'm not a public health expert. I don't work in health field such as Senator Davis, but just in my prior reading, it actually would decrease the number of folks who would seek an exemption for vaccines. So, I'm interested to hear the debate on the floor. I think we'll probably hear this Tuesday if there's no amendment, and I'll make my decision at that point.
Representative Sharma, your thoughts on House Bill 1223 and the conscience objection.
Well, I serve on Commerce and Energy, Transportation, and Military and Veterans Affairs. I'm not on the Healthcare Committee. I haven't heard the bill. I don't know what additional amendments are on the bill or what additional amendments will be added before we vote for it on the floor. So I want to hear the proponents and opponents speak within our caucus, which is where we hear about it as a group for the first time, and then again as it's debated on the floor. So I don't have any idea which way I'm going to vote on this bill yet until I see the whole thing. Thank you.
So we're coming to the end of our allotted time, and we have a block of time for each of you to give a final statement. Representative Caston, I'm going to start with you. Each of you 90 seconds for a final statement.
Yes, thank you, Dean Fulton. And I just want to thank everybody for coming out today. I mean, this is a Saturday morning, and you can choose to spend your time in a lot of different ways. And coming out and hearing your concerns and listening to what we have going on up here, it means a lot to us, and it means to it shows us that we do have support from back home when we're making the decisions, because ultimately you are the folks who send us to Pier. Obviously a special thank you to the VCDC and the hosts for another fantastic forum. Again, I continue to maintain to my friends and colleagues that it's the best and the gold standard by which Cracker Barrels are ran across the state. I don't see him in the room, but we did have the 2025 Page of the Year sitting with us. Cale Fulton was in the room earlier. I bring that up for two reasons. One, he did a fantastic job of Page, but also as we think towards next year, and it's going to be here before you know it. The Page program is great, and also our intern program is great. So if you know anybody interested in either one of those, please reach out to anybody sitting up here, and we'll certainly help those folks get up to Pier and either be a Page or an intern and really fully learn about our system of government. We have a long ways left. We have a lot left to contemplate in this legislative session. The budget's going to be the last couple of weeks is all you generally left for the budget, and we're going to have a lot of things left to make some really hard decisions on. But I would let you know, I understand, and I've heard from many of you, even in this room, about South Dakota Public Broadcasting, about the library, about some of these things that we really care about. And please know your thoughts and your concerns are heard, and, their voice is being heard in Pierre, and we're going to do the best we can to restore those cuts. So, again, thank you for being here. I appreciate each one of you, and, we'll just continue to do the very best we can.
Thank you, Representative Casson. Representative Sherman, 90 seconds for a closing statement.
Thank you, Dean Fulton. This may sound like a punchline, but it's not. I'm honored to serve you. I work hard and do my very level best to try to understand every issue from top to bottom. Sometimes, sometimes I get texts and emails once in a while, like hundreds a day, seriously, hundreds of texts a day saying vote no or vote yes. And often it's fairly balanced. Sometimes I got a blanket of over 150 emails that were all identical on one particular subject this time. You have to scroll all the way to the bottom through this long, lengthy thing to see where they live, and they don't say. So, trust me, when you send a text to us or an email, put who you are and where you live, because it has a bigger impact. Not because I don't care about everybody else that's responding, but it means more if it comes from somebody in my district that I know. So please do that. Like I said, it's an honor to serve you. You know what? People that show up for something like this are making a commitment to do the very best job we can. And I believe that's the case with 90% of the legislators. I'm not there to move on to higher office. I'm there because I want to serve you. I've held all kinds of responsibility in the businesses and companies that I ran and sold and so on. This is about looking out for keeping South Dakota the way South Dakota is and maybe making it better in some ways. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you showing up today. That was great.
Thank you, Representative Sherman. Senator Davis, 90
Yeah.
seconds for a final statement.
Thank you. We've got 4 weeks left of the legislative session. We have a big deadline coming up February 25th. That's what we call crossover day. So as I kind of mentioned that how the Senate is prioritizing getting through our Senate bills, the House is prioritizing getting through their House bills. We're not seeing a lot of things crossing over quite yet because we have a week to get through the Senate's work. The House has a week to get through theirs yet. And effectively, if it's not passed out of the House of Origin by then, it's dead. So by the time we come back and visit with you guys again, we should have a good idea of what's on the table, what's still in play, and that will be helpful for our conversations and productivity there. I appreciate everyone's emails, calls, texts. As Representative Sherman said, we do get a high volume of emails. It's very helpful to know where you're from because I like to prioritize the people that sent me to peer first. I do my best to respond, I really do, but between committees and meetings and things like that, sometimes it's just not as possible to respond. We have no staff, we have no secretaries, and so it's just a one-man show representing you, and we do the best we really can, so appreciate your patience. And lastly, just decisions are made by people that show up and give their input, and so thank you again for being here today and letting us hear what's important to you, and look forward to talking again in a couple weeks.
I want to end with just a few thank yous again to the VCDC for organizing this event, particularly to Katie Heine and Rhea for making the mechanics go today, to today's
How about a round of applause for Dean Fulton?
How about not? To our sponsors, the USD Opportunity Center, Maloney Real Estate, Masaba, Premier Real Estate and Property Management, Sodexo, Biomat USA, Vermillion Hy-Vee, Dakota Realty and Property Management, and Polaris. And thank you to the Clay County Democrats for sponsoring refreshments. Thank you, Senator Sidney Davis, Representative Chris Casson, Representative Bill Sharma for being out here today and for representing us to peer. And finally, to everyone in the audience, thank you for being here and having a thoughtful and engaged discussion. To the degree we did not get to an issue, my apologies for that, but the system works because we engage as citizens, and it is just refreshing and hope-giving to me to see everyone so deeply engaged, so thoughtful, and so respectful as we discuss important issues. Thank you.